In the shadowed corridors of Raven's Hollow Palace, where ancient stones hold centuries of secrets and every whisper carries the weight of kingdoms, a single moment would shatter the fragile peace that had taken years to build. When Princess Isabella's mysterious collapse during the Harvest Festival sent shockwaves through the realm, no one expected that her road to recovery would become a battlefield where loyalty, power, and family bonds would be tested to their very limits. What started as a medical emergency would soon reveal dark conspiracies, hidden agendas, and the true cost of wearing a crown in a world where trust is the rarest currency of all. The autumn air hung heavy with the scent of burning leaves and roasted chestnuts as Princess Isabella made her way through the crowded marketplace of Raven's Hollow. The annual Harvest Festival had drawn thousands to the capital, their laughter and chatter creating a symphony that usually brought joy to her heart. But today, something felt different. The colors seemed too bright, the sounds too loud, and a strange heaviness pressed against her chest with each breath she took. Isabella had always been the beloved princess of Valdoria, known for her genuine warmth and dedication to her people. Unlike her stepmother, Queen Marcella, who ruled with calculated precision, or her father, King Theodore, who preferred the solitude of his study, Isabella thrived among the common folk. She remembered their names, asked about their families, and genuinely cared about their struggles. It was this very quality that made her both adored by the people and seen as a threat by those who preferred to rule from a distance. As she approached the main stage where the traditional blessing ceremony would take place, Isabella noticed the subtle changes in the palace guard formation. Usually, her personal guard, Captain Marcus, would be at her right side, his familiar presence a constant source of comfort. But today, a stranger stood in his place. A tall, imposing man with cold gray eyes and a scar running down his left cheek. When she quietly asked about Marcus, she was told he had been reassigned to border duties at the last minute. The ceremony began with the usual pageantry. Isabella took her place beside Queen Marcella, who wore her signature icy smile and a gown that seemed designed more for intimidation than celebration. The queen had married Isabella's father 5 years ago, after Isabella's beloved mother died in what was officially called a riding accident. Since then, the palace had become a different place, colder, more formal, filled with new faces that served the queen's interests rather than the kingdom's welfare. During the blessing ritual, Isabella was required to drink from the ceremonial chalice, an ancient tradition symbolizing the royal family's connection to the land and its people. As the ornate silver cup touched her lips, she noticed a slight bitter aftertaste beneath the traditional honey wine, but dismissed it as nerves. The crowd cheered as she raised the chalice high, blessing the harvest and promising prosperity for all. Within minutes, the world began to spin. Isabella's vision blurred and a crushing pain spread across her chest like fire through dry timber. "Why is it so to spirit in the temple design?" She tried to call out, but her voice came as barely a whisper. The last thing she remembered was the horrified gasps of the crowd and the feeling of strong arms catching her as she fell. The news of Princess Isabella's collapse spread through the kingdom like wildfire. Official reports from the palace stated that she had suffered from exhaustion and would require extended rest. But in the taverns and markets, people whispered different stories. Some claimed they had seen her stumble before drinking from the chalice. Others noticed how Queen Marcella's expression had remained strangely calm throughout the entire ordeal, almost as if she had been expecting it. Dr. Edmund Hart, the royal physician who had served the crown for over 20 years, was summoned immediately. He found Isabella unconscious in her chambers, her breathing shallow and her skin pale as moonlight. His initial examination revealed symptoms that troubled him deeply. They didn't match simple exhaustion or even a fainting spell. The princess's pulse was irregular, her pupils dilated, and there were signs of systemic distress that suggested something far more sinister. As Dr. Hart worked to stabilize Isabella's condition, he became increasingly aware that he was not alone in his concerns. Several longtime palace staff members approached him privately, sharing their own observations about recent changes in the royal household. They spoke of new servants who reported directly to Queen Marcella, mysterious midnight meetings in the queen's private chambers, and the sudden departure of several loyal retainers who had served King Theodore for decades. Queen Marcella, meanwhile, took swift control of the situation. She announced that Isabella's condition required complete isolation and that all medical decisions would be made through her as the senior royal present. King Theodore, who had grown increasingly frail and distant since his second marriage, seemed unable to challenge his wife's authority. The Queen appointed her own trusted advisor, Lord Damien Blackthorne, to oversee all aspects of Isabella's care and recovery.
Lord Blackthorne was a man whose reputation preceded him like a dark cloud.
He had arrived at court shortly after Queen Marcella's marriage, claiming to be a distant cousin with expertise in matters of state security. His pale complexion and perpetually cold demeanor had earned him few friends among the palace staff, but his influence with the queen was undeniable. Now, with Isabella incapacitated, he seemed to take particular pleasure in his new authority over her welfare. The first sign of real trouble came 3 days after Isabella's collapse. Dr. Hardy arrived at the princess's chambers for his morning examination, only to find his path blocked by 2 unfamiliar guards. They informed him that new security protocols were in effect, and that all medical visits must be approved in advance by Lord Blackthorne. When Dr. Hart protested that he had been attending to royal medical needs for 2 decades, the guards simply stared at him with blank expressions and repeated their instructions. It was then that Prince William arrived. Isabella's older brother had been away on a diplomatic mission to the neighboring kingdom of Astoria when news of his sister's condition reached him. He had ridden hard for 3 days straight, changing horses at every posting station and sleeping only when exhaustion threatened to topple him from his saddle. William had always been protective of Isabella, especially since their mother's death, and the formal tone of the message summoning him home had filled him with dread. William found the palace transformed in his absence. Where once there had been familiar faces and warm greetings, now cold strangers watched his every move. The servants he had known since childhood either avoided his gaze or were mysteriously absent from their usual duties. Most disturbing of all, when he attempted to visit Isabella immediately upon his arrival, he too was met with the same stone-faced guards who had turned away Dr. and Harty. The confrontation that would change everything began in the corridor outside Isabella's chambers. William had spent a sleepless night gathering information from the few remaining loyal servants, and what he learned had turned his worry into cold fury. Isabella was being kept in virtual isolation, with only Queen Marcella's chosen attendants allowed access.
It's this sound.
Her meals were being prepared in the Queen's private kitchen rather than the main palace kitchens, and strangest of all, her personal maid Sarah, who had been with Isabella since childhood, had been dismissed without explanation.
When William demanded to see his sister, Lord Blackthorne appeared as if summoned by some invisible signal.
The man's thin smile and condescending tone immediately set William on edge, but it was Blackthorne's casual dismissal of his concerns that pushed the prince beyond the bounds of diplomatic courtesy. Blackthorne explained that Isabella's condition was delicate and that emotional disturbances could prove harmful to her recovery. He suggested that William's obvious distress might be too much for his sister to bear in her weakened state. It was at that moment that William noticed movement through the partially open door to Isabella's chambers. A figure in servant's garb was approaching his sister's bedside, carrying what appeared to be a small vial of liquid. The person's movements were deliberate and secretive, glancing nervously toward the door before continuing their approach. Something about the scene triggered every protective instinct William possessed, and he realized with crystalline clarity that Isabella was not being cared for. She was being kept prisoner, and possibly worse. The explosive confrontation that followed would echo through the palace halls for days to come. William's commanding voice, trained in battlefield leadership, cut through the stone corridors like a blade as he shouted those words that would become legendary among the palace staff: "Get away from her!" The sheer force of his fury sent the mysterious figure scrambling away from Isabella's bedside, dropping the vial in their haste. The sound of breaking glass seemed to shatter more than just crystal. It broke the carefully maintained illusion that all was well in the royal household. What happened next would determine not just Isabella's fate, but the future of the entire kingdom. As guards rushed to restrain him, and Lord Blackthorne's mask of civility finally slipped to reveal the calculating predator beneath, William realized that saving his sister would require more than royal authority. It would demand everything he had learned about warfare, strategy, and the delicate art of survival, in a palace where loyalty could be bought and sold like any other commodity.
The battle for Isabella's life and for the soul of Valdoria itself was about to begin.
The shattered vial lay on the marble floor like accusations made manifest, its contents spreading in a dark stain that seemed to absorb the morning light streaming through Isabella's chamber windows. The acrid smell that rose from the spilled liquid made William's eyes water, and he noticed how quickly the servant who had dropped it retreated, covering their nose and mouth with a cloth as if they knew exactly what dangers the substance posed. Lord Blackthorne's reaction to the broken vial was perhaps even more telling than the mysterious liquid itself. For just a moment, his carefully composed mask slipped, revealing a flash of genuine anger and something that looked remarkably like fear.
That's a subsequent night yourself a dyer, but truth is.
He quickly regained his composure, but not before William caught sight of the calculation in his eyes as he assessed this new complication in whatever plan had been unfolding in Isabella's chambers.
Your Highness, Blackthorn said, his voice carrying a warning beneath its formal courtesy. Your dramatic entrance has potentially compromised your sister's treatment.
That medication was specifically prepared by our most skilled healers to aid in her recovery, but his words rang hollow in the sudden silence that had fallen over the room, and William noticed how the assembled guards shifted uncomfortably, their hands moving instinctively toward their weapons. William ignored Blackthorn entirely, pushing past the guards with the authority that came from a lifetime of royal training and recent years of military command.
As he approached Isabella's bedside, what he saw there made his blood run cold.
His vibrant, beloved sister lay motionless against the pillows, her skin pale as parchment and her breathing so shallow it was barely visible. But it was her eyes that truly alarmed him. When she managed to focus on his face, there was a cloudiness there that spoke of more than simple illness. "Isabella," he whispered, taking her hand in his. Her fingers were cold as winter stone, and when she tried to speak, her voice came as barely a whisper. "William?" she managed, but the confusion in her eyes suggested she wasn't entirely sure he was real. "I've been having such strange dreams. Mother was here warning me about something, but I can't remember what." The mention of their deceased mother sent a chill through William that had nothing to do with the cool autumn air. Isabella had always been practical and clear-minded, not given to fevered fantasies or superstitious beliefs. If she was seeing visions, it suggested her condition was far more serious than anyone had admitted, or that someone wanted it to appear that way.
Dr.
Hardy, who had been hovering anxiously near the chamber door since William's dramatic arrival, finally stepped forward. "Your Highness," he addressed William, "I've been trying for days to conduct a proper examination of the princess, but I've been denied access." What little I was able to observe during her collapse suggests symptoms that don't align with simple exhaustion or even common illness. Blackthorn moved to intercept the conversation, but William's commanding presence and the barely contained fury radiating from him kept the advisor at bay. "Explain," William demanded, never taking his eyes off Isabella's pale face. "What symptoms?" The old physician glanced nervously at Blackthorn before continuing. "Dilated pupils, irregular heartbeat, confusion, and a particular pallor that I've only seen in cases of." He paused, clearly struggling with whether to voice his suspicions in such dangerous company. "In cases of deliberate poisoning."
Your Highness. The words hung in the air like a sword about to fall.
Several of the guards stepped back involuntarily, as if the very accusation might be contagious. Blackthorn's face went through a series of rapid expressions: surprise, outrage, and finally a cold calculation that was somehow more frightening than his anger had been.
"That is a serious accusation, Dr. Hart." Queen Marcella's voice came from the doorway, causing everyone in the room to turn.
She stood framed by the entrance like a figure from a painting, her elaborate morning gown and perfectly arranged hair a stark contrast to the chaos that had erupted in her absence. "I trust you have evidence to support such a claim?" William studied his stepmother's face carefully as she entered the room. Marcella had always been beautiful in a cold, untouchable way, but today there was something different about her demeanor. She moved with the confidence of someone who held all the advantages, and her eyes held a glitter that suggested she was enjoying the dramatic tension more than mourning her stepdaughter's condition.
Evidence? Dr. Issy.
Hart's voice carried decades of professional authority. "Your Majesty, I would need to conduct proper tests, examine the princess's food and drink, analyze her symptoms over time. But I've been prevented from doing any of these things by Lord Blackthorn's new security protocols." He gestured toward the broken vial on the floor.
"Perhaps we should start by analyzing whatever was in that container." Marcella's gaze followed the physician's gesture to the shattered glass and spreading stain. For just a moment, William saw something flicker across her features. Not surprise, but the look of someone whose carefully laid plans had encountered an unexpected obstacle.
"Of course," she said smoothly. "Lord Blackthorn, please ensure that Dr. Jasmine Hart has whatever he needs to conduct his investigation." But even as she spoke the words, William noticed the subtle signal she gave to one of her guards, a barely perceptible nod toward the spilled contents of the vial. He realized that by the time any investigation could be conducted, the evidence would have been cleaned away, along with any chance of proving what had really been intended for his sister. Acting on instinct honed by years of military training, William moved quickly to position himself between the guard and the broken vial.
No one touches anything in this room until Dr. Pauly's brain
Hardy has had a chance to examine it, he declared, his voice carrying the authority of royal command and the implicit threat of consequences for anyone who disobeyed. The tension in the chamber became almost tangible as opposing forces faced each other across Isabella's sickbed. On one side stood William and Dr. Ted Hardy, representing the old loyalties and traditional protections of the royal family. On the other, Queen Marcella and Lord Blackthorn commanded the newer allegiances and the power structures they had carefully built over the past 5 years. Isabella stirred in her bed, drawing everyone's attention. Her eyes opened wider than they had since William's arrival, and for a moment, the confusion cleared from her gaze.
"The chalice," she whispered, her voice barely audible but carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "At the festival,
It tasted wrong. Bitter. The admission sent shockwaves through the assembled group. Several palace guards who had been present at the festival exchanged meaningful glances, their own memories apparently stirred by the princess's words. William saw recognition dawning on Dr. Hart's face as pieces of a puzzle began falling into place.
Queen Marcella stepped forward, her expression a masterpiece of concerned stepmother and worried regent. "Isabella, darling, you're clearly still very ill."
Fever can cause all sorts of strange memories and sensations. You mustn't distress yourself with such confused thoughts.
But her soothing words carried an undertone that suggested Isabella would be wise to keep such observations to herself. It was then that William noticed something that made his heart race with both hope and terror. Standing in the shadowed alcove near Isabella's window was a figure he had thought lost to them forever. Sarah, Isabella's childhood maid and closest confidant. The young woman's presence in the chamber was officially forbidden, yet here she was, and the expression on her face suggested she had been listening to every word of the confrontation. Sarah's eyes met William's across the room, and he saw in them a determination that matched his own. She had clearly been hiding in the chamber.
Probably caring for Isabella in secret whenever the official guardians were absent.
Her presence meant that someone had been watching over his sister, but it also meant that she might have witnessed things that could prove dangerous to more than just Isabella's health. Lord Blackthorn had also noticed Sarah's presence, and his reaction was swift and decisive. "Guards," he commanded, "arrest that servant for violation of security protocols. She has no authority to be in the princess's chambers." 2 guards moved immediately toward Sarah's hiding place, but William stepped into their path. "She stays," William declared, his hand moving to rest on the hilt of his sword. It was a gesture that carried enormous significance in the formal protocols of the palace, signaling his willingness to use force to protect someone under his authority.
"Sarah has been caring for my sister since we were children."
If anyone understands Isabella's normal behavior and health, it's her. The standoff that followed would determine not just the immediate fate of everyone in the chamber, but the future direction of the entire kingdom. Queen Marcella's carefully constructed authority was being directly challenged by William's traditional royal prerogatives, while the evidence of possible poisoning hung in the air like an unspoken accusation that could topple governments and destroy dynasties.
Marcella's eyes glittered with a cold calculation as she assessed her options.
She could order the guards to arrest both William and Sarah, but doing so would risk open rebellion from the palace staff who still remembered the old loyalties. She could attempt to maintain her authority through negotiation and compromise.
But that would require admitting that her control was not absolute.
Or she could escalate the confrontation to a level where only one side could emerge victorious.
"William," she said finally, her voice carrying a silky threat, "I understand your concern for your sister."
But you've been away from court for months while Lord Blackthorn and I have been managing the day-to-day responsibilities of governance. Perhaps it would be best if you allowed those with more recent experience to handle this delicate situation.
It was a masterful attempt to undermine his authority while appearing reasonable, but William had spent too many years in military command to be outmaneuvered by political manipulation. "My recent experience," he replied with deadly calm, "includes dealing with enemies who use poison as a weapon of war."
I know what it looks like, how it works, and what must be done to counter its effects. The implications of his words struck the room like lightning. He was not just defending his sister or questioning medical protocols. He was making a direct accusation of attempted murder against someone in the royal household. The stakes had just escalated beyond political maneuvering to matters of life, death, and treason. In the tense silence that followed, Isabella stirred again, her voice stronger than it had been since William's arrival. "Sarah," she whispered, "tell him about the tea. Tell him what you saw." Every eye in the chamber turned toward the young maid, who stood frozen in her alcove like a deer caught between hunters.
Sarah held information that could either save Isabella's life or cost her own, and everyone present understood that her next words would determine which outcome would prevail. The battle for Isabella's life was entering its most dangerous phase, where truth and lies would collide with the force of kingdoms in conflict, and where the price of victory might be higher than anyone was prepared to pay. Sarah stepped forward from her shadowed alcove with a courage that belied her humble station, her small frame somehow managing to command the attention of everyone in the chamber.
The young maid's hands trembled slightly as she began to speak, but her voice carried the clear ring of truth that comes from someone who has nothing left to lose. Your Highness, she addressed William directly, ignoring the dangerous glares from Queen Marcella and Lord Blackthorn. I've been watching over Princess Isabella whenever I could slip past the guards.
What I've seen. She paused, swallowing hard before continuing. It's not natural illness that's affecting her. William moved closer to Sarah, positioning himself between her and the Queen's guards while encouraging her to continue. Behind him, he could hear Isabella's breathing becoming more labored, as if the very act of revealing the truth was taking a physical toll on her weakened system.
Dr. Pansel?
Hardy had moved to the princess's bedside and was discreetly taking her pulse, his weathered face growing more concerned with each passing moment. 3 days ago, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, I saw Lord Blackthorn's personal servant Marcus the Thin preparing the princess's evening tea in the Queen's private kitchen instead of the main kitchen where all royal meals are prepared. When I questioned why the change in procedure, he told me it was on direct orders from Her Majesty for security reasons. Queen Marcella's composure finally began to crack at the edges.
Security reasons? She echoed, her voice carrying a note of forced surprise. I gave no such orders. You must be mistaken about what you saw.
But even as she spoke, William noticed her fingers fidgeting with the elaborate rings on her hands, a nervous habit he remembered from their early acquaintance, one that only appeared when she was under severe stress. Sarah shook her head firmly.
I wasn't mistaken, Your Majesty. I watched Marcus add something to the tea from a small glass bottle he kept hidden in his robes.
When he noticed me watching, he threatened to have me dismissed from service if I spoke of it to anyone. But I couldn't stay silent while Princess Isabella grew sicker each day.
Lord Blackthorn stepped forward, his pale face flushed with what appeared to be righteous indignation.
This is preposterous,
he declared. A servant's word against the established protocols of the royal household? Marcus the Thin has served with distinction for years.
These are the ravings of a hysterical girl who clearly cannot handle the stress of her mistress's illness. But William was watching Blackthorn carefully, and he noticed something that the advisor probably didn't realize he was revealing. When Sarah mentioned Marcus the Thin by name, Blackthorn's left eye had developed a slight twitch, a tell that William had learned to read in adversaries during his military campaigns. The man was lying, and doing so badly. Dr. Hart looked up from Isabella's bedside, his expression grave.
The princess's pulse is becoming increasingly erratic, he announced. Whatever substances may have been administered to her, the effects are cumulative and growing worse.
If we don't act soon to counteract the poisoning, we may lose her entirely. The word poisoning, spoken with the authority of the royal physician's office, sent a visible shockwave through the assembled guards.
This is the book it's about. There's so certainly your entire expulsion.
Several of them had served the royal family for decades, watching Isabella grow from a beloved child into the principled young woman she had become.
The idea that someone might be deliberately harming her was clearly disturbing to their sense of duty and honor.
Isabella herself struggled to raise her head from her pillows, her voice weak but determined.
William, she whispered, I need to tell you something.
About Mother's death. I've been remembering things that didn't make sense before. A deadly silence fell over the chamber at the mention of the late queen.
The official story had always been that she died in a riding accident, a tragic fall from her favorite horse during an afternoon ride through the royal forest. But Isabella's words suggested there might be more to the story, and everyone present understood the implications of such a revelation.
Queen Marcella moved swiftly to Isabella's bedside, her expression a masterpiece of concerned stepmother and protective guardian.
Isabella, sweetheart, you're clearly delirious with fever.
You mustn't strain yourself with such difficult memories. What you need is rest and proper medical care, not these upsetting conversations.
But Isabella pushed weakly against Marcella's attempts to silence her, her eyes finding William's face with desperate intensity. The day Mother died, she continued, her voice growing stronger with effort, I saw her talking with someone in the garden, a man I didn't recognize then, but I've seen him since. He works for Her gaze shifted meaningfully toward Lord Blackthorn, but she was too weak to finish the accusation directly. William felt his blood turn to ice water in his veins. If Isabella's memories were accurate, if their mother's death had not been an accident, then the conspiracy they were facing went far deeper than simple poisoning.
It suggested a long-term plan to eliminate obstacles to Queen Marcella's power, with Isabella as merely the latest target in a campaign that had been years in the making. Lord Blackthorn was no longer bothering to maintain his facade of concerned advisor.
His face had taken on a hardness that revealed the true nature of the man beneath the courtly manners. "Your Highness," he addressed William directly, "I'm afraid your sister's condition has become quite serious. In her delirious state, she's making wild accusations that could damage the stability of the kingdom. Perhaps it would be best if she were moved to a more secure location where she can receive the specialized care she clearly needs."
The threat was barely concealed.
Blackthorn was suggesting that Isabella be removed from the palace entirely, taken to some location where she could be kept isolated and, if necessary, silenced permanently. William realized that they had reached the point of no return. Any further delay would give their enemies time to complete whatever final plans they had for his sister. It was then that an unexpected ally appeared in the chamber doorway. Captain Marcus! Isabella's longtime personal guard, who had supposedly been reassigned to border duties, stood framed by the entrance with a dozen loyal palace guards behind him. His weathered face was grim with purpose, and his hand rested on the pommel of his sword in a gesture that left no doubt about his intentions. "Your Highness," Captain Marcus addressed William with a formal bow, "I received word that the princess might be in danger." I took the liberty of returning from my private system to ensure her safety. The slight emphasis on the word assignment made it clear that his reassignment had not been voluntary, and that he had discovered something during his forced absence that had brought him back to the palace. Queen Marcella's face went pale at the sight of Captain Marcus and his loyal guards. She had clearly counted on his absence as part of her plans, and his unexpected return represented a significant shift in the balance of power within the palace. "Captain," she said, her voice carrying a warning, "you were given specific orders about your duties." Abandoning your post is a serious breach of protocol. Captain Marcus stepped fully into the chamber, his men spreading out behind him in a formation that effectively blocked the exit. "Your Majesty," he replied with careful formality, "my primary duty has always been to protect the royal family. When I learned that Princess Isabella was in danger, that duty superseded all other considerations." William felt a surge of hope at the sight of these reinforcements, but he also understood that the situation had now escalated to a point where violence might be inevitable. The guards loyal to Queen Marcella and Lord Blackthorn were outnumbered, but they were also trapped in the chamber with no easy means of escape. Desperate people in desperate situations were capable of extreme measures. Dr. Bond's tough to separate and secretarial, but oppressive temporarily, could still make it easier to quit. Hart, who had been working quietly at Isabella's bedside throughout the confrontation, suddenly straightened with an expression of alarm. "The princess is going into crisis," he announced urgently. "Her breathing is becoming severely compromised. Whatever poison was used, it's reaching a critical concentration in her system. We need to act immediately or we'll lose her." The medical emergency cut through the political standoff like a sword. Whatever schemes and counter-schemes had been unfolding in the chamber, they all became secondary to the immediate need to save Isabella's life. William rushed to his sister's side, taking her cold hand in his and feeling the weak, irregular flutter of her pulse beneath his fingers. "What do you need?" he asked Dr. Hart urgently. "What can we do?" The old physician's face was grave but determined. "First, we need to identify exactly what poison was used. The symptoms suggest something from the nightshade family, but without knowing the specific compound, I'm working blind. Second, we need to clear her system using techniques I learned during my studies in the Eastern Kingdoms, but some of these methods are unconventional." Lord Blackthorn stepped forward, his expression calculating. Surely moving the princess to a proper medical facility would be more appropriate than attempting experimental treatments in her bedchamber. But his suggestion was met with skeptical stares from everyone present, as it was clear that removing Isabella from the protection of her loyal guards would be tantamount to signing her death warrant.
It was Sarah who provided the breakthrough they desperately needed.
"Dr. Hart," she said quietly, "if you need to know what poison was used, I kept something that might help." From beneath her servant's apron, she produced a small cloth bundle that she unwrapped to reveal fragments of the glass vial she had retrieved from the floor. "When the vial broke," she explained, "I managed to collect some of the shards before the guards could stop me. There's still residue on the glass that might tell you what was inside."
Her quick thinking and brave action had preserved evidence that could be the key to saving Isabella's life. Dr. Hart took the glass fragments with hands that trembled slightly with excitement. "This could be exactly what I need," he said, already moving toward the window where the morning light would allow him to examine the residue more closely. "Sarah, your quick thinking may have saved the princess's life." But as hope began to bloom in the chamber, Queen Marcella made a decision that would force the simmering conflict into the open. "Guards," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of absolute power. "Arrest Dr. Hart for practicing unauthorized medicine on a member of the royal family.
Arrest Sarah for theft of royal property, and arrest Captain Marcus for abandoning his assigned duties." The chamber erupted into chaos as opposing forces finally collided. The guards loyal to the Queen moved to carry out her orders, while Captain Marcus and his men stepped forward to protect those who were trying to save Isabella. William found himself in the center of a whirlwind of conflicting loyalties and deadly intentions, with his sister's life hanging in the balance. The battle for Isabella's survival, and for the truth about the conspiracy that threatened the entire royal family, was about to reach its explosive conclusion.
The clash of steel rang through Isabella's chamber as opposing guards drew their weapons, the sound echoing off the ancient stone walls like the death knell of the old order. Queen Marcella had finally thrown off all pretense of legitimate authority, and her command to arrest those trying to save Isabella's life had shattered the last illusions about her true intentions. Captain Marcus moved with the fluid grace of a seasoned warrior, his sword appearing in his hand as if by magic. "Stand down," he commanded the Queen's guards, his voice carrying the authority of decades of military service. "I will not allow harm to come to those who serve the true interests of the royal family." Behind him, his loyal men formed a protective barrier around Dr. Hart and Sarah, their weapons drawn but their stance clearly defensive. William stepped between the opposing forces, his own sword half drawn but not yet committed to violence. He understood that once blood was shed in this chamber, there would be no going back to political solutions or diplomatic compromise. The kingdom would be plunged into civil conflict with Isabella's life still hanging in the balance. "Stop!" he commanded, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "My sister is dying while we argue about politics and protocol. Dr. Hart, continue your work. Everyone else, step back and let him save her life. We can settle our differences afterward."
But Queen Marcella was beyond reason now, her carefully constructed facade having crumbled to reveal the ruthless ambition beneath.
"There will be no afterwards if we allow these traitors to spread their lies," she declared. "Lord Blackthorn, order your men to secure the chamber. Use whatever force is necessary." Lord Blackthorn's response revealed the true nature of his relationship with the Queen. Instead of the deferential advisor he pretended to be, he stepped forward with the confidence of a man who wielded real power behind the scenes. "Captain Marcus," he said with cold authority, "you and your men are outnumbered and outmaneuvered.
Surrender now, and I guarantee you'll face trial rather than immediate execution." The threat hung in the air like poison gas, but Captain Marcus merely smiled grimly.
"Lord Blackthorn," he replied, "you clearly haven't been paying attention to palace loyalties. Let me show you something." He raised his left hand and made a subtle gesture toward the chamber windows. The response was immediate and overwhelming. From the windows, balconies, and doorways surrounding Isabella's chamber came the sound of dozens of feet and the rustle of weapons being readied. Palace guards, kitchen staff, stable hands, and servants appeared at every vantage point, their faces grim with determination. The entire palace staff, it seemed, had been waiting for this moment. Queen Marcella's face went ashen as she realized the extent of the conspiracy against her. "This is treason," she whispered, but her voice carried no conviction. She was finally beginning to understand that her years of manipulation and intimidation had not created loyalty. They had created a powder keg waiting for someone to light the fuse. Dr. Hart, meanwhile, had been working frantically to analyze the residue from the broken vial while the political drama unfolded around him. "I've identified the poison," he announced suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension like salvation itself. "It's extract of belladonna, concentrated and mixed with several other compounds to mask its effects and delay its action, extremely sophisticated and clearly prepared by someone with advanced knowledge of toxicology." The revelation sent another shock through the chamber as the implications became clear. Belladonna poisoning required careful preparation and precise timing. This was not a crime of passion or opportunity, but a carefully planned assassination attempt that had been weeks or months in the making. Isabella stirred weakly on her pillows, her eyes finding William's face with desperate clarity. "The festival," she whispered,
her voice barely audible, but carrying clearly in the sudden silence. They've been dosing me slowly for weeks. Small amounts of my food, my wine. The festival chalice was just the final dose. The admission hit the chamber like a thunderbolt. Sarah stepped forward, her face pale but determined. It's true, she confirmed. I've been watching, trying to protect her. The princess has been getting sicker gradually, so slowly that it seemed like natural fatigue. But I started tasting her food before she ate it, and some of it had that same bitter aftertaste she mentioned. William felt rage building in his chest like a furnace. But he forced himself to remain focused on the immediate crisis. Dr. Hart, can you counteract the poison? What do you need? The elderly physician nodded grimly. Belladonna poisoning can be treated, but we need to act quickly. I'll need activated charcoal to absorb what poison remains in her system, specific herbs to counteract the toxic effects, and careful monitoring to ensure her heart rhythm stabilizes. But first, he turned to face Queen Marcella directly. I need to know if there were other compounds mixed with the belladonna. The residue suggests additional substances that could complicate treatment.
Queen Marcella remained silent, her face a mask of cold defiance. But Lord Blackthorn, perhaps realizing that their position was now hopeless, stepped forward with a calculating expression.
Dr. Hart, he said slowly, what assurance do we have that you'll treat the princess properly? Your accusations suggest you might have motivations beyond simple medical care. It was a masterful attempt to cast doubt on the physician's intentions, but William saw through the manipulation immediately. The assurance, he replied coldly, is that Dr. Hart has served this family faithfully for 20 years, while you've been here for 5, and have spent that time systematically removing everyone who might oppose your influence.
Captain Marcus stepped forward, adding his own evidence to the growing case against the conspirators.
Your Highness, he addressed William formally, during my forced assignment to the border, I took the opportunity to investigate certain irregularities in palace staffing. 3 longtime servants who questioned new security procedures have died in accidents over the past year. 2 guards who expressed concerns about changes in the Queen's household have disappeared entirely. This conspiracy goes far beyond the princess's poisoning.
The revelations were coming so quickly now that even the Queen's remaining supporters seemed shaken. Several of her guards exchanged uncertain glances, clearly reconsidering their loyalties in light of evidence that their orders might have made them accessories to multiple murders.
Whoa! Dr. Hart had returned to Isabella's bedside and was preparing various treatments from his medical supplies. I'm going to begin the detoxification process, he announced. Princess Isabella, can you hear me clearly? When she nodded weakly, he continued. This may be unpleasant, but it's necessary to save your life. The activated charcoal will help absorb the poison, but it may cause nausea and discomfort. As the physician began his work, William kept careful watch on Queen Marcella and Lord Blackthorn. Both had fallen silent, but their eyes were constantly moving, assessing escape routes and calculating their remaining options. Men and women cornered often became most dangerous when they had nothing left to lose.
It was Sarah who noticed the subtle signal that passed between the Queen and her advisor, a barely perceptible nod that suggested they had reached some final desperate decision.
Your Highness! She called out in warning. But her cry came just as Lord Blackthorn produced a hidden blade from within his robes and lunged toward Isabella's bedside.
The attack came with the speed of desperation and the precision of someone who had killed before. Blackthorn clearly intended to silence Isabella permanently, gambling that without her testimony the accusations against him and the Queen could be dismissed as the hysteria of grief-stricken relatives. William's response was instantaneous and deadly. His sword cleared its scabbard in a motion so fluid it seemed like a continuation of his breathing, and the blade met Blackthorn's attack with a ringing clash that sent sparks flying across the chamber. The prince had spent years in military training and recent months in actual combat, while Blackthorn, for all his cunning, was ultimately a schemer rather than a warrior. The brief but vicious sword fight that followed would be remembered by witnesses for the rest of their lives. William fought with the controlled fury of a man protecting his family, while Blackthorn attacked with the desperate ferocity of someone who knew this was his last chance to eliminate the evidence of his crimes. Steel rang against steel in the confined space of the chamber, both men seeking the opening that would end the fight forever. The decisive moment came when Blackthorn, realizing he was outmatched in swordplay, attempted to use Isabella herself as a human shield. He broke away from direct combat with William and lunged toward the princess's bedside, intending to hold his blade to her throat and force a standoff that might allow him and the Queen to escape. But he had forgotten about Sarah, who threw herself between him and Isabella's bed with the fierce protectiveness of someone who had helped raise the princess from childhood.
Blackthorn's blade found its mark but in Sarah rather than his intended target, and the young maid's sacrifice gave William the opening he needed to end the threat permanently.
William's final thrust was precise and merciless, driven by years of training and the righteous fury of a brother protecting his sister. Lord Blackthorn crumpled to the marble floor, his schemes and ambitions dying with him, leaving only Queen Marcella to face the consequences of their conspiracy. The chamber fell silent except for Isabella's labored breathing and Sarah's quiet moans of pain from her wound.
Doctor!
Hart worked frantically over both patients, while Captain Marcus and his men secured Queen Marcella, who seemed to have aged decades in the space of minutes. William knelt beside Sarah, taking her hand as Dr.
Hardy examined her injury. "You saved Isabella's life," he told her quietly. "Your courage and loyalty will not be forgotten." Sarah managed a weak smile despite her pain. "She would have done the same for me, Your Highness."
That's the kind of person Princess Isabella is, worth any sacrifice to protect. As the immediate crisis began to subside, William realized that, while they had won this battle, the larger struggle for the kingdom's future was just beginning.
Queen Marcella's conspiracy had reached deeply into the palace hierarchy, and rooting out all of its influences would require careful investigation and decisive action. But for now, Isabella was alive. The immediate threat had been eliminated, and the truth was finally beginning to emerge from years of shadows and deception. The fight for justice was far from over, but William could finally allow himself to hope that his beloved sister would recover. To see it through to its conclusion, the dawn light filtering through Isabella's chamber windows seemed to carry new hope as Dr. Billy's girl scalps in. Hardy announced that the princess had survived the most critical phase of her poisoning. Her breathing had stabilized, her pulse had grown stronger, and the deadly pallor was slowly giving way to the first hints of natural color returning to her cheeks. But everyone in the chamber understood that her physical recovery was only the beginning of a much larger restoration that would need to take place. Queen Marcella sat under guard in the corner of the chamber, her elaborate gown now wrinkled and stained, her perfect composure finally shattered beyond repair. The woman who had ruled the palace with such calculated precision for 5 years now appeared diminished and ordinary, stripped of the mystique that had made her seem so formidable. Yet William knew better than to underestimate her. Even in defeat, cornered serpents often delivered their most venomous strikes. Sarah rested in a chair beside Isabella's bed, her shoulder bandaged, but her spirits remarkably high considering the danger she had faced. "Dr. Feisnight blew the solution from you?" Hart had pronounced her wound serious but not life-threatening, and she had insisted on remaining close to the princess despite her own need for rest. The bond between the two young women, forged in childhood and strengthened through years of shared secrets, had proven stronger than any political conspiracy. Captain Marcus stood near the chamber entrance, coordinating with the dozens of loyal palace staff who had revealed themselves during the crisis. The breadth of the conspiracy against Queen Marcella had surprised even William. It seemed that her years of manipulation and intimidation had created not loyalty, but a vast network of silent resistance waiting for the right moment to act. Isabella herself was finally strong enough to sit up in her bed, though she remained weak and needed frequent rest. The poison's effects would take weeks to fully clear her system, but her mind was sharp and her memory clear. Most importantly, she was ready to tell the full story of what she had discovered about their mother's death and the conspiracy that had threatened to destroy their family.
5 years ago, Isabella began, her voice still weak but carrying the clear ring of truth. "I was only 13 when Mother died."
Everyone told me it was a riding accident, and I wanted to believe that because the alternative was too terrible to imagine. But I never forgot what I saw that last day.
William moved closer to his sister's bedside, taking her hand in his for comfort and encouragement. Around them, the assembled group listened in silence to revelations that would reshape their understanding of recent history.
Mother had been investigating irregularities in the kingdom's finances, Isabella continued. She had discovered that large sums were being diverted from the royal treasury through a complex network of false contracts and phantom suppliers.
When she tried to bring her evidence to Father, she found that his closest advisors were either part of the conspiracy or had been replaced by people who served other interests. The implications of this revelation sent shockwaves through the chamber. King Theodore's increasing withdrawal from palace affairs over the past 5 years suddenly took on a more sinister significance. Had he been gradually isolated and manipulated, or had he been complicit in his first wife's death? Sarah spoke up from her chair, adding her own piece to the puzzle. "Princess Isabella asked me to help her investigate some of the old records from that time.
We found evidence that several of the current palace staff were hired shortly after the late queen's death, and many of the longtime servants were dismissed or transferred around the same time. It was like someone was systematically replacing everyone who might have been loyal to the old order. Queen Marcella finally spoke from her position under guard, her voice carrying a note of defiance even in defeat.
"You speak of loyalty and truth as if they have any meaning in the real world," she said coldly. "Your mother was naive, just as you are."
She thought she could challenge powerful interests with evidence and moral authority. Look where it led her.
The casual admission of guilt in her words struck the chamber like a physical blow. William felt his hand tighten involuntarily on his sword hilt, but he forced himself to remain calm. There would be proper justice for Queen Marcella, but it would come through lawful means rather than the heat of vengeance. Dr. Hardy, who had been quietly tending to both patients while listening to the revelations, suddenly straightened with a grave expression. "Your Highness," he addressed William, "if Queen Marcella was involved in your mother's death, then we must consider the possibility that she has also been manipulating King Theodore's health. The king's increasing frailty and mental confusion over the past years may not be natural aging. The suggestion that their father might also have been a victim of slow poisoning added yet another layer of horror to the conspiracy." William realized that they needed to act quickly to protect King Theodore and to determine the full extent of the damage that had been done to the royal family over the past 5 years. Captain Marcus stepped forward with urgent news. "Your Highness, my investigation during my forced absence revealed that this conspiracy extends beyond the palace walls. Several noble houses have been receiving mysterious payments that appear to be connected to Queen Marcella's financial network. We may be looking at a plot that involves overthrowing the entire royal line and replacing it with a puppet government controlled by foreign interests." The scope of the conspiracy was almost overwhelming in its ambition and complexity. What had appeared to be a simple case of stepmother jealousy was revealing itself as an international plot involving treason, murder, and the systematic destruction of Valdoria's independence.
Isabella struggled to sit up straighter in her bed, her eyes bright with determination despite her physical weakness.
"William," she said urgently, "there's something else you need to know. During the weeks when I was being slowly poisoned, I overheard conversations between Queen Marcella and Lord Blackthorn about the final phase of their plan. They were expecting emissaries from a neighboring kingdom to arrive soon, supposedly for a trade negotiation. But I believe they were planning to use Father's incapacitated state and my death to sign treaties that would effectively cede Valdoria's sovereignty." The urgency of the situation suddenly became clear. Even with Queen Marcella captured and Lord Blackthorn dead, there might be other conspirators still active in the palace, and the expected arrival of foreign agents could trigger the next phase of the plot regardless of what had happened to its original leaders. William turned to Captain Marcus with decisive authority. "Captain, I need you to take a squad of our most trusted guards and secure King Theodore immediately. Have
The Herald examined him for signs of poisoning and place him under protection until we can determine the full extent of the conspiracy. Also, increase security at all palace entrances and prepare to intercept any unexpected diplomatic visitors." As Captain Marcus hurried to carry out these orders, William faced the difficult question of what to do with Queen Marcella. She possessed crucial information about the conspiracy's scope and timing, but extracting it would require careful interrogation by someone skilled in such matters.
It was Sarah who provided an unexpected insight into their captive's psychology. "Your Highness," she said quietly, "during my time observing the Queen's household, I noticed that she keeps detailed records of everything.
If we can find her private chambers and search them thoroughly, we might discover written evidence of the entire conspiracy." The suggestion sparked immediate action as several guards were dispatched to secure and search Queen Marcella's rooms.
Meanwhile, Dr. Hart continued his careful monitoring of Isabella's recovery while preparing to examine King Theodore for possible poisoning. Within hours, the search of Queen Marcella's chambers had yielded a treasure trove of evidence. Hidden behind a false panel in her private study, the guards discovered detailed correspondence with foreign agents, financial records showing the flow of bribes and payments, and most damning of all, a timeline outlining the systematic elimination of obstacles to the conspiracy's success. The documents revealed that the plot had been years in the making, beginning even before Queen Marcella's marriage to King Theodore. Her courtship of the widowed king had been orchestrated by foreign interests seeking to destabilize Valdoria from within, and every aspect of her behavior since the marriage had been calculated to advance their goals. Perhaps most chilling was the discovery of a detailed plan for the kingdom's future once the conspiracy succeeded. Valdoria would become a puppet state controlled by its more powerful neighbors, its resources systematically exploited, and its people reduced to subjects of a foreign empire. The entire royal family was to be eliminated,
with their deaths made to appear as tragic accidents or natural causes. As the full scope of the conspiracy became clear, William understood that they had prevented not just Isabella's murder, but the complete destruction of their kingdom's independence. The courage shown by Sarah, the loyalty demonstrated by Captain Marcus and the palace staff, and Isabella's own determination to uncover the truth had literally saved their nation. But even with the immediate crisis resolved, significant challenges remained. King Theodore would need time to recover from whatever substances might have been affecting his judgment. The noble houses that had been corrupted by foreign gold would need to be identified and dealt with appropriately. Most importantly, Valdoria would need to rebuild the trust and institutions that had been systematically undermined over the past 5 years.
So that's not about us. It's just
Isabella, despite her continuing weakness from the poisoning, insisted on being involved in the restoration process.
I want to help rebuild what they tried to destroy, she declared with characteristic determination.
Mother died trying to protect our kingdom's independence. We owe it to her memory to finish what she started.
As the sun set on what would be remembered as one of the most dangerous days in Valdoria's history, William stood at his sister's bedside reflecting on the events that had brought them to this point. The confrontation that had begun with his desperate shout of, "Get away from her!" had ultimately saved not just Isabella's life, but their entire kingdom.
Sarah dozed peacefully in her chair beside the princess's bed, her bandaged shoulder a badge of honor earned through courage and loyalty.
Dr. Nazan knows it. Hardy worked quietly at his table, preparing the medications that would help both patients complete their recovery. Captain Marcus maintained his vigilant watch, ensuring that no further threats could penetrate their defenses.
The kingdom of Valdoria had survived its greatest crisis through the simple but powerful combination of family love, personal courage, and the loyalty of those who believed in justice over convenience.
As Isabella's breathing grew deeper and more peaceful with each passing hour, William allowed himself to believe that the worst was finally behind them, and that the future would be built on truth rather than the lies that had nearly destroyed them all.
The battle for Isabella's life had become a battle for their kingdom's soul, and in winning that fight, they had proven that even the most sophisticated conspiracies could not overcome the simple but unshakable power of people willing to sacrifice everything for what they knew to be right.